The pine needles beneath Ayana's feet made no sound as she moved through the pre-dawn darkness of the Georgia wilderness. Her father had taught her how to walk like wind, how to breathe like shadow, skills passed down through generations of Cherokee hunters now reduced to memory since President Jackson had signed their death warrant 7 years before. The Indian Removal Act, they called it, as if you could peel a people out of their bones, out of their blood, away from the earth that had known their names for 1,000 years. She carried a woven basket against her hip, filled with the morning's work, bloodroot for fever, wild ginger for Josiah's cough, sassafras for the tea that reminded him of his mother, though he never said so aloud. Words were dangerous things for a man like Josiah, a runaway enslaved man who had dared to claim his own name, his own body, his own future. The cabin appeared slowly through the pale river mist rising from the Chattahoochee, a low shape tucked so deep among pines and undergrowth that even the deer sometimes startled when they passed it. Josiah had built it board by board with his own hands, the same hands that had once forged chains for other people's captivity. The irony was never lost on either of them. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, every rock in it handpicked from the riverbed and carried back in aching arms. Ayana could already smell the cornmeal cakes he was cooking, could picture him standing over the fire, broad shoulders bent forward, the scars on his back a constellation of cruelty that she traced with her fingers on nights when thunder woke old memories. "You're late," he said when she pushed the door open, but the smile that followed washed any rebuke away. Josiah had the kind of smile that could make winter flowers bloom, rare, precious, and worth protecting at any cost. "The bloodroot was deeper in the forest this morning," Ayana replied, setting her basket on the rough-hewn table. "The earth is pulling everything inward. It's getting ready for winter." Josiah crossed the room with the careful, watchful movements of a man who expected the world to strike him at any moment. 6 feet of muscle and gentleness wrapped in skin the color of rich mahogany. His calloused hands, shaped by years at the forge and months of building their hidden life, cupped her face with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "We should go farther west," he said quietly. "Every day we stay, the risk grows." Ayana leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. "And every day we run, we lose another piece of ourselves. My people ran. They ran all the way to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears, and still they died. Thousands of them, my mother, my sisters. Running didn't save them, Josiah. But staying killed them," he countered, voice breaking on the words. "Baby, I can't," his throat tightened. "I can't lose you because I was too stubborn to keep moving." She opened her eyes and really looked at him. The fear that lived in the corners of his mouth, the love burning in his dark eyes like lantern light in a storm, the impossible choice he woke up with every morning, stay and risk capture or run and die inside. "Then we make this place a fortress," she said firmly. "We prepare, we survive, together." "Together," he echoed, the word falling between them like a prayer and a promise. They ate in comfortable silence. The kind that comes when two people have learned each other's rhythms so well that words become optional. Through the single window, Ayana watched the forest wake, squirrels chattering in the oaks, a red-tailed hawk circling above, the endless green of Georgia that had become both sanctuary and prison. After breakfast, Josiah went to check his traps. Ayana spread a deer hide across the table and began working in a mixture of brain and water, pressing it into the skin in slow circular motions. Her grandmother had taught her this back when the Cherokee Nation still existed as more than a ghost story, back when being Indian was a heritage instead of a crime. The work was steady and repetitive, the kind that allowed her mind to wander. They had been here 8 months now, 8 months since the night Josiah staggered into what was left of Cherokee territory, bleeding, delirious, more dead than alive. She had found him by the riverbank, his back torn open from a whipping, fever burning through him like wildfire. The smart thing would have been to leave him there. Helping a runaway was dangerous enough. Falling in love with one was suicide. But Ayana had stopped being sensible the day she watched her mother freeze to death on the forced march west, the day she realized the law was just another word for cruelty dressed in patriotic colors. She had dragged him to her small shelter, boiled water over hidden fires, cleaned his wounds with hands that shook with anger more than fear. She'd fed him herbs and hope until the fever broke and he finally opened his eyes. "My name is Josiah," he'd whispered, tongue thick and slow. "Not boy, not property, Josiah." "Ayana," she'd answered. "It means eternal blossom." "That fits," he'd said, managing the ghost of a smile. "You just brought me back from the dead." Now, months later, his presence felt as natural as the trees outside, as necessary as breathing. The sound of dogs barking in the distance snapped her out of the memory. Ayana's hands froze on the deer hide. Every muscle in her body went taut. Dogs, more than one, and beneath their baying the low rumble of men's voices. She moved to the window and peered through a narrow gap in the shutters. She saw nothing yet, but the sound was getting closer, moving with purpose through the trees. That alone told her what she needed to know. These weren't hunters out for game, these were men with a mission. Her heart pounded, not with wild panic, but with a cold, almost crystalline clarity she'd felt only once before, on the day she held her dying mother and realized that mercy in this world was often just another word for cowardice. She crossed to the corner where Josiah kept his tools, hammers, chisels, iron rods, relics of the blacksmith life he'd been forced to live. Behind them, hanging from 2 wooden pegs, was what she was reaching for, her father's tomahawk. It was a beautiful thing despite its work. The handle carved from hickory, worn smooth by generations of hands. The blade was steel traded from white settlers long ago, polished and kept sharp all these years. Along the handle, her father had carved small symbols, Cherokee syllabary, spelling out their family name, protection signs, prayers to the spirits of forest and river. The weight of it in her hand felt like coming home. The door burst open. Josiah stumbled in, eyes wild. "Ayana, they're coming," he panted. 5 men, maybe 6, professional trackers by the look of them, dogs trained for scent. He stopped when he saw the tomahawk in her hand. "Oh, no," he said, shaking his head. Crossing to her. "No, baby. We run. We run right now." "Where?" she asked softly. "They have dogs, Josiah. They have horses. They have the law on their side and murder in their hearts. If we run, they'll catch us in the open. If we stay..." Her fingers tightened on the handle. "We choose our ground." "They'll kill you," he said desperately, gripping her wrists. "Or worse, you know what they do to Indian women who help runaways. You know." She did. She'd heard the stories, Cherokee women raped and murdered, their bodies dumped in ditches, their deaths blamed on Indian savagery or bad luck. Justice was something white men wrote about when they meant themselves. Everyone else was property or pest. "Then we make them pay for the privilege," Ayana said, meeting his eyes. "My people died running. Your people died obeying laws designed to kill them. I will not die like that. Not begging, not running, not on my knees." Outside, the dogs were louder now, their voices taking on the frantic edge that meant they had locked onto a scent. Through the shutter gap, Ayana saw a movement between the trees, shadows resolving into men on horseback. 5 of them, just as Josiah had said, rough clothes, expensive weapons, rifles that glinted in thin light, pistols at their hips, knives hanging like promises. "Hide," she told Josiah, her voice suddenly steel. "Under the floorboards, the space you made. Go. I won't leave you to..." "You will," she cut in. "If they take you, everything we built dies. But if I stop them, if I buy us time, we live, we endure. Trust me, my love, the way I trusted you that first night." Something in her tone, absolute, unshakable, reached through his panic. He kissed her once, hard and desperate, tasting of salt and fear and coffee, then dropped to his knees. He pried up the loose boards they had prepared for this exact nightmare and slipped into the dark hollow beneath. Ayana lowered the boards, smoothed the rug back over them, scattered a few baskets in their usual place. Then she moved to the center of the cabin. The tomahawk hung loose in her right hand, her left open and closed, feeling the cool October air leaking through the walls. The dogs reached the door first, hurling their bodies against it, claws tearing at the wood. Men's voices followed. "We know you're in there," someone shouted. "Come out peaceful and nobody needs to get hurt." The lie was almost funny. As if peace had ever been an option for people like her and Josiah, as if the men outside weren't already deciding exactly what kind of hurt they wanted to inflict. Ayana walked to the door, her footsteps silent on the packed earth floor. She took one slow breath in and let it out, steadying her hands, her heart, her mind. Then she lifted the wooden bar, pulled the latch, and opened the door. 5 men sat on their horses in a rough semicircle outside the cabin, their dogs straining at their leashes, teeth bared, eyes bright with training and hunger. The leader, a man with a gray beard and eyes the color of river ice, looked Ayana up and down and smiled, slow and ugly. "Well, now," he drawled, "ain't you a pretty little savage? You hiding a runaway in there, girl. Big buck, strong as an ox. Answers to the name property of Mason Turner of Savannah." "I know no one by that description," Ayana replied calmly, her voice carrying the musical cadence of Cherokee speech. "You're on Cherokee land. You should leave." The men laughed hard and mean. "Cherokee land?" the leader said. "Darling, there ain't no Cherokee land no more. That all got bought and paid for. You're squatting on Georgia soil now, which makes you a criminal. We can do this easy, or we can do this hard. Your choice." He swung down from his horse, boots hitting the ground with heavy thuds. The other 4 followed, spreading out in a slow, practiced circle around her. The dogs whined, pulling against their chains, trained to recognize dark skin as target, trained to equate brown bodies with prey. Ayana felt her fingers tighten around the tomahawk handle. In her mind, her father's voice rose like wind through pines. "Wait for the moment when they think they've already won. That's when they're blind. That's when you strike. Last chance, savage," the leader said, drawing a knife from his belt. His smile widened, showing uneven teeth, something worse behind them. "Tell us where the runaway is and maybe we let you live. Maybe we even have a little fun first if you're nice about it." One of the men behind him was already unbuckling his belt. The others laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. Ayana looked at them, really looked. 5 men who saw Josiah as property, 5 men who saw her as less than an animal, 5 men who called murder law and cruelty duty, men who stood on stolen land and claimed it as their birthright. "Love is not a crime," she said quietly. Then she moved. She stepped forward so fast the dogs flinched. The tomahawk came up in a short, brutal arc, not the blade but the back spike leading. The iron point punched into the leader's throat with a wet, tearing sound. His eyes went wide, his knife slipping from his hand as blood bubbled from the hole where his voice used to be. He made a broken, gargling sound and dropped to his knees. Ayana yanked the tomahawk free in one smooth pull and spun away from his collapsing body before it even hit the dirt. The second man fumbled for his pistol, shocked by how quickly the little savage had become death. He was still fighting with the holster strap when she reached him in 3 long strides. The tomahawk came down like a falling star, biting deep where neck met shoulder. Bone crunched. His pistol fired wild, a shot sailing harmlessly into the pines, sending birds screeching into the sky. Ayana left the tomahawk buried in his flesh and turned to face the remaining 3 with empty hands. They'd snapped out of their surprise now. Guns came up. Boots shifted in the dirt. The dogs whirled in circles, confused by blood and violence they hadn't caused. "You red bitch!" one of them screamed. The man with the river ice eyes, now standing in a spray of his companion's blood, raised his rifle barrel leveled at her chest. Ayana dove sideways, rolling behind the cabin wall as the rifle cracked. Splinters exploded from the doorway where her head had been a heartbeat before. She could hear them shouting, repositioning, trying to surround the cabin. 3 men, all armed, all used to hunting terror-stricken quarry who ran in blind panic. But she wasn't prey. Not today. Her gaze locked on the second man's body, lying 10 feet away, her father's tomahawk still lodged in his ruined shoulder. If she could get to it, she had a chance. Footsteps crunched through pine needles on the far side of the cabin. One of the trackers was circling, trying to flank her. His boots whispered against the forest floor, his breathing faster than he probably realized. Ayana dropped to her belly and slid through the dirt with the silent, careful movements her father had drilled into her as a child. She hugged the wall, then crawled around the corner, keeping low. The man paused, sensing something wrong but not sure what. She saw his boots first, polished leather, too clean for the wilderness. Her hand closed around a fist-sized stone. She rolled in one fluid motion and sprang up from the ground, appearing at his feet like a spirit rising from the earth. The rock smashed into his temple with a crack like splitting ice. He staggered, rifle tumbling from his hands. Ayana caught his knife as he reached for it, turned it in one smooth movement, and drove it up under his ribs. She angled it toward his heart, using every ounce of strength she had. His breath rushed out against her face, hot and sharp with whiskey and tobacco. His hands clawed weakly at her shoulders as she held the blade inside him and counted his fading heartbeats. 3, she whispered as the light went out of his eyes and his body sagged to the ground. A bullet hissed past her ear, close enough that she felt the heat of it. She dropped behind the falling man's body as more shots shredded the air, punching into their companion's corpse. Flesh tore, bones snapped. The dead man jerked like a broken doll under his own friend's panicked fire. In the moment when they stopped to reload, Ayana lunged for the second man's body and grabbed the tomahawk's handle. It came free with a horrible sucking sound. Blood slicked her hands, but the familiar weight steadied her. 2 left. The gray-eyed man was shouting orders, voice cracking with fear. "Spread out, she's just one squaw. We've killed dozens of her kind." But Ayana could hear the tremor. Fear was contagious. It spread from leader to follower like fever, and she could sense it boiling through the clearing. She slipped into the trees, moving low and fast, using every trunk and branch for cover. This was her world. She knew every deer trail, every dip in the ground, every shadow that held more safety than threat. Another man appeared through the trees, rifle swinging back and forth, eyes too wide, hands too tight on the stock. He was young, no more than 20, someone's son, someone's brother, someone who had chosen to hunt human beings for profit. Ayana dropped from a low oak branch above him. Gravity did half the work, the tomahawk did the rest. The blade caught him across the side of the head, splitting skull and sending a shudder up her arms. He crashed to the ground, rifle firing uselessly into the dirt. She landed on his chest, pinning him. His hands flew up to shield his face, but he was too late. The tomahawk rose and fell, until his features vanished beneath blood and shattered bone. When she finally stopped, her arms were slick with red, nearly to the elbows. She stood over the ruined body, chest heaving, heart pounding like a drum. 4, she said to the watching forest. A twig snapped behind her. Ayana spun, tomahawk already lifting, but the gray-eyed leader stood 10 paces away, pistol steady, both hands clenched tight around the grip. At this distance, he couldn't miss. They stared at each other over that small span of earth. His face was a mixture of rage and horror, the expression of a man who had spent his life believing the world belonged to him and now suddenly realized it did not. "Drop it," he snarled. "Drop the weapon or I put a bullet through your heart." Ayana flexed her fingers around the handle. She could throw it. Her father had taught her how. If she aimed true, she could bury the blade in his chest or skull, but even if she hit him, he'd still get a shot off. They'd both die, and Josiah would remain under the cabin floor alone, waiting for footsteps that would never come. Slowly she opened her hand and let the tomahawk fall. It landed in the pine needles with a soft final thud. The man's shoulders slackened with relief, but his gun didn't waver. "You killed 4 good men," he said. 4 men just doing their job, just enforcing the law. You know what they'll do to you for that, savage? You know what the law allows? "Your law," Ayana answered, voice quiet but steady, "is written in stolen ink on stolen paper about stolen land. What do I care for the laws of thieves?" His face twisted. Brave words for a dead woman. "At least I'll die free," she said. "Can you say the same? Does the money spend well knowing you earned it hunting people? Do you sleep sound knowing you're just a dog for hire?" "Shut up," he snapped, taking a step closer, gun shaking now. "Just shut your mouth." "My mother died free," Ayana continued. "On the trail of tears. She died in the snow, but she never bowed, never broke, never became what they wanted. Did yours raise a son who hunts other men's wives for coin?" I said, "Shut up," he roared, fury burning away his last bit of control. He stepped closer, finger tightening on the trigger. The cabin door exploded outward. Josiah came through it like a storm, like every hour of fear and rage made flesh. He had stayed hidden as long as he could, listening to gunshots and screams, to the sick sounds of violence he couldn't see, but hearing that man spit on Ayana's mother, hearing him talk about hanging in law, had snapped something inside him. In his hands was the iron poker from the fireplace, still hot from the coals. The gray-eyed man whirled, pistol swinging toward this new threat. He fired once, but the shot went wild. Then Josiah was there. The poker came down like a hammer. Bone cracked in the man's shoulder. The pistol flew from his hand. He screamed high and thin. Josiah hit him again, ribs this time, then again and again, each blow marked by the crunch of breaking bones and the wet cough of failing lungs. "Josiah," Ayana cried. "Josiah, stop." But he couldn't. Years of chains, years of being called boy instead of a name, years of being beaten for existing, years of knowing men like this could decide whether he lived or died with a flick of their wrists. It all poured out through his arms, through that iron poker, through every brutal stroke. Finally, his strength gave out. The poker slipped from his grip and dropped into the blood-soaked earth. The gray-eyed man lay twisted on the ground, limbs bent wrong, chest rising in short, wet gasps. His eyes were clouded with pain and a dawning horror that came too late. Josiah stood over him, chest heaving, hands trembling. When he spoke, his voice was low and shaking. "My name," he said, "is Josiah, not boy, not property, not buck, Josiah." He glanced at Ayana, then back down at the dying man. "And this woman, this brave, fierce woman is my wife, not in your churches, not in your courts, but in every way that matters. Remember that when you meet whatever God you claim to serve." The man tried to speak, but only blood bubbled at his lips. His body shuddered once, twice, and went still. Silence settled over the clearing. No dogs, no shouts, just wind whispering through pine needles and the distant caw of crows that had already noticed 5 fresh bodies cooling in the October air. Ayana crossed the blood-streaked ground to Josiah. Her bare feet left red prints in the dirt. She reached out and touched his arm. He flinched as if her fingers were flame. "I killed them," he whispered, staring at his hands as if he didn't recognize them. "I killed white men? They'll hunt me forever now. They'll never stop." "Who?" Ayana asked softly. "Josiah, they were already hunting you. At least now they know the cost." He turned to her, tears cutting clean lines through the spatter on his face. "You could have run," he said, "when they came. You could have gone into the forest, let them take me, saved yourself." "And lose the only person who makes me want to survive?" she asked. "No. We live together, or we die together. But we do not abandon each other. That's the promise we made." He pulled her into his arms, then, body still shaking, breath ragged. She held him, this man who had crawled out of a life designed to kill him. This man who had chosen love over safety. This man who was hers in every way that mattered. Around them, 5 bodies lay in twisted shapes, their blood soaking into Georgia soil. The dogs had fled, leashes dragging behind them as they ran. Someone would come, someone always did. Men like these didn't disappear without questions. But for the moment, in the quiet clearing with smoke still scenting the air and death all around, Ayana and Josiah stood together, alive and free, if only for a little while longer. It took 3 hours to deal with the dead, 3 hours of grim labor neither of them would ever describe in full, and by the time the last body was dragged into the forest and hidden beneath shallow earth and fallen logs, Ayana had already made up her mind. This life, this cabin, this small sanctuary they carved out on stolen Cherokee land was over. If they wanted to live, truly live, they'd have to burn it all and walk away. It was nearly sunset by the time Ayana and Josiah returned to the cabin, the home they had built with their hands, their sweat, and the fragile hope that the world might forget them for a little while. That hope had died alongside the 5 men buried beneath pine needles and loose soil. Only smoke remained now, smoke from exhaustion, smoke from fear, smoke from the knowledge that the world would come for them harder than before. Ayana moved through the single room in silence. Every object, every woven basket, every small carving Josiah had made, every herb tied from the rafters felt like a piece of themselves. But everything they didn't carry would become evidence. Everything left behind would become a trail for men who hunted for money and called it justice. She knelt beside her basket of herbs, selecting only what she could carry. Bloodroot, ginger, sassafras, a few rare leaves she had spent months finding. The rest she left. She paused over the table Josiah had built, running her fingers over the smooth wood. They had eaten every meal together here, laughing, fighting, comforting each other in the dark when old ghosts rose with thunder. Josiah watched in silence, his eyes hollow. His hands shook as he gathered blankets and dried venison. He paused by the small window where mornings had once felt warm and possible. "We should take the tools," he said, finally, voice cracking. "Might need them." Ayana nodded. "Take what you can carry." He crossed to the corner where his blacksmith tools hung, relics of a life he'd never chosen. His hand hovered over a few items before selecting a small hammer worn smooth with use. He tucked it into his belt like a promise. Ayana picked up her father's tomahawk, the blade clean now, though ghosts clung to it, and ran her thumb along the familiar carvings in the hickory. She whispered a Cherokee prayer under her breath, asking forgiveness, asking protection, asking strength for the road ahead. Then she walked to the cabin door. "What are you doing?" Josiah asked, though he already knew. Ayana took a sharp breath. "This place is a map of who we are. If they find it, if they recognize anything, they'll follow us, and they'll never stop." Josiah closed his eyes, as if bracing himself. "I know." But knowing didn't soften the blow. Ayana took her hunting knife and knelt beside the doorframe. Slowly, carefully, she carved 4 words into the wood. The letters were uneven, a little shaky. Her writing was still new, but they were clear. "Love is not a crime." Josiah stood behind her, reading over her shoulder. His hand found the back of her neck, warm, trembling, and full of everything he couldn't say. "They won't see it that way," he murmured. "They'll say we're murderers, savages, criminals." "Let them," Ayana replied, rising to her feet. "The forest knows the truth, the land knows, and that's enough." She struck her flint against steel, and the spark caught on a pile of dry pine needles they'd heaped together in the center of the floor. Flames licked upward immediately, hungry and hot, climbing the wooden walls with terrifying speed. Josiah backed out into the clearing, his face lit orange by fire and memory. Ayana joined him, and the two of them stood shoulder to shoulder as the cabin, their cabin, burned. It wasn't just a building being consumed. It was their refuge, their safety, the home where they had learned to breathe again. Every board Josiah had cut, every herb Ayana had harvested, every night they had shared beneath its roof, all of it turning to ash. "I loved that place," Josiah whispered. "Loved what it meant. A place where I wasn't property, a place where you weren't hunted, a place where we were just people." Ayana swallowed hard. "We'll build another." He didn't answer. Maybe he didn't believe it. But hope, even fragile hope, was all they had left, and so she held to it with both hands. As the flames roared and the roof finally collapsed inward, sending embers spiraling into the cold October air, Ayana and Josiah turned away without speaking. They gathered their small bundle of belongings and walked west into the coming night. Behind them, the fire devoured the last piece of their old life. Ahead of them, the forest swallowed their footsteps as if trying to protect them. They walked until the stars came out, following deer paths and forgotten trails, keeping to the shadows. When Josiah paused to catch his breath, they heard it. Faint at first, then undeniable. Dogs. Men. Voices shouting. Horse hooves pounding against brittle leaves. Ayana exchanged a look with Josiah. No panic, no surprise, only grim understanding. "They found the bodies sooner than we thought," she said. Josiah grabbed their bag, jaw tightening. "Then we keep moving." They ran until darkness turned the world to silhouettes, and the moon rose to guide their steps. They ran until the Chattahoochee lay before them, cold and wide, its current fast from recent rains. Dogs barked behind them, hooves thundered, torches flickered. Ayana dropped her dress and tied their belongings tight. "Trust me," she said, grabbing his hand. "I do," he answered without hesitation. And together they stepped into the freezing river, running not for escape, not for vengeance, not for glory, but for the simple, stubborn, defiant belief that love was worth crossing any water, any darkness, any world built to destroy them. The river was colder than Ayana expected, so cold it shocked the breath from her lungs and made Josiah gasp beside her. The Chattahoochee flowed strong and fast at this crossing, its dark water swirling around them with a force that threatened to drag their legs out from beneath them. Ayana tightened her grip on Josiah's hand. "Don't fight the current," she said through chattering teeth. "Let it carry us sideways. Angle your body like this." "I'm trying," Josiah gasped, his voice strained. "I can't feel my legs." "You don't need to," she said. "Just hold on." Behind them the dogs reached the riverbank. Howling, furious, confused, torches flickered between the trees. Men's voices rose in frustration. Ayana heard one of them shout, "They're in the water, they're trying to cross," and more yelling. "Oh," as a command barked, then crack, a rifle shot split the air. The bullet slammed into the water 10 paces away, erupting in a spray of silver droplets. 2 more shots followed, one close enough that Ayana felt the ripple of its passage. "Dive," she ordered, pulling Josiah under. The river swallowed them, icy and deafening. Ayana opened her eyes to the blurred, shifting green of the underwater world. Her lungs burned, her body screamed, but she pulled Josiah deeper, using the current to drag them downstream. They surfaced 20 yards away, sputtering, gasping, their hair plastered against their faces. "She's there," someone shouted from the shore. "Shoot again." But the night wind had risen, whipping the torches and bending the sound. The river carried Ayana and Josiah too fast. Shots cracked in the dark, hitting water far from where they struggled, bullets slapping the surface harmlessly. The current slammed Josiah into a submerged rock. He cried out and nearly lost his grip on their bundle of belongings. "Josiah!" Ayana lunged, catching the strap before it washed away. "Hold on to me. I'm slipping," he choked. "Ayana, No." She grabbed him with both hands, forcing her body between him and the pull of the water. "I didn't drag you back to life for the river to take you. Kick! Kick! Now!" Whether it was her voice or sheer will to survive, Josiah obeyed. He kicked, and together they surged toward the opposite bank. Ayana's feet brushed bottom, soft mud, then gravel. "We're close," she cried. "Just a little farther." Behind them, the dogs were losing their minds, throwing themselves at the water. Men shouted curses, furious at losing their prey. Ayana pulled Josiah the last few steps, both of them collapsing onto the muddy bank in a tangle of limbs and dripping clothes. They gasped for air, shaking uncontrollably. Josiah lay on his back, staring up at the stars. "They almost had us," he whispered. "If you hadn't—" "We're not safe yet," Ayana said, already pushing herself up. "Come on, move." They staggered into the trees on the far side of the river, dripping water and leaving a faint trail, but a trail that ended at the water's edge, one no dog could follow. Within minutes they were swallowed by the forest. The river roared behind them like a guardian slamming a door shut. Josiah leaned against a tree, trembling, his breath uneven. "Ayana, I would have drowned." Ayana cupped his face in her hands. "But you didn't. You trusted me. I always will." A rustle in the trees snapped their attention. They froze, but it was only an owl swooping silently through the branches. "Come," Ayana whispered. "Night is our friend now. We must use it." They walked for hours, their clothes clinging to them like ice. The moon rose high, then dipped toward the horizon. Their muscles screamed, their bodies begged to stop, but Ayana pushed forward, driven by instinct older than memory. At dawn, they collapsed in a clearing surrounded by ancient oaks. Ayana spread one blanket and wrapped the other around Josiah's shivering body. "Rest," she murmured. "I'll watch first." He nodded weakly, exhaustion dragging him under. But Ayana stayed awake, her tomahawk across her knees, eyes scanning the forest. When the sun climbed higher, Josiah stirred, opening his eyes to the soft light filtering through leaves. How far do you think we ran?" he asked. 10 miles, Ayana replied. "Maybe 12, not enough, never enough, but a start." Josiah reached for her hand. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "Sorry you had to kill for me. Sorry I brought this on you." "You didn't bring anything on me," she whispered fiercely. "I chose you, and I'll choose you again every time." He swallowed hard, tears stinging his eyes. "I love you. I love you more." The forest around them was peaceful now, birds singing, leaves rustling, but Ayana knew it was only a pause, a breath before the next storm. The South would not let them go easily. Blood had been spilled, white blood. And for men like these, that was a wound pride would not allow to heal. Ayana tightened her grip on the tomahawk. "They're not done," she said softly. "And neither are we." But for the first time since the cabin had burned, she let her eyes close just for a moment, just long enough to gather strength for whatever waited in the miles ahead. They moved at dusk, always at dusk, the hour when shadows stretched long and the forest softened its edges, offering shelter to those who knew how to listen. Ayana and Josiah had become creatures of twilight. They traveled when honest folks slept, and hid when the sun was high enough to reveal tracks and mistakes. 3 weeks passed like this. 3 weeks of hunger gnawing at their ribs. 3 weeks of fear tracing their footsteps. 3 weeks of Ayana teaching Josiah how to read the forest like scripture, and Josiah teaching Ayana how to feel danger from the quality of silence alone. 3 weeks of learning each other's survival the way lovers learned each other's breathing. They had crossed into Tennessee now, and each mile north felt like a small victory, yet every victory was sharpened by the knowledge that rumors traveled faster than footsteps. On the 21st day they found proof. At a lonely crossroads stood a tree with a paper nailed to its bark. Ayana spotted it first and froze, lifting a hand to halt Josiah. "What is it?" he whispered. "A warning," she said. She approached slowly, heart tightening. The paper was crude, drawn by a hand that cared more about hatred than accuracy. Still, the shapes were unmistakable. Her, hair long, face sharp. Him, tall, broad-shouldered, dark skin. Above the drawings were the words, "Wanted for murder. One Cherokee woman aged 20-22. One Negro male aged 25-30. Extremely dangerous. Reward $500, dead or alive." Josiah exhaled in a trembling breath. $500, dude. That's more money than most white men see in 2 years. Ayana tore the poster down and crumpled it in her fist. "Then every poor man from here to Virginia will be hunting us." Josiah rubbed his face with shaking hands. "Ayana, maybe we head west now. Maybe we forget the swamp. Maybe we—" "No," she cut in, steady and sharp. "We move forward, always forward." "But what if—" She turned to him fully. "If we stop now, we die. If we hesitate, we die. If we turn around—" She shook her head. "There's nothing behind us but graves." Josiah nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "All right, north then." They traveled until night thickened and fatigue dragged at their bodies. Around midnight they heard something unusual, voices singing. Low, mournful, beautiful voices. Josiah stiffened. "Those are spirituals," he whispered. "Slave songs." "Danger?" Ayana asked. He listened a moment longer, then shook his head. "No, that's not danger, that's truth." They crept closer until the trees broke and they saw a cotton field lit by moonlight. 20 enslaved men and women worked steadily, singing as they moved. A lone overseer sat slumped on horseback, half asleep. One of the women, older, gray hair, wrapped in a faded red cloth, noticed Ayana and Josiah at the tree line. She froze only for a heartbeat. Then she lifted her voice louder, signaling the others. The rest joined her, not with fear, but with purpose. They sang not to grieve, but to shield, to cover the sound of footsteps, to create a doorway of song. Ayana and Josiah slipped closer, moving like ghosts through the crops. When they reached the edge of the field, the gray-haired woman bent low as if tending a plant. Her lips moved barely enough to form sound. "You're them," she whispered. "The Cherokee girl and the man they hunting." Ayana's jaw tightened. "We need food, water, a place to hide." The woman didn't look up. "Can't give food. Overseer counts every crumb, but there's a root cellar behind the third cabin. You hide there till night. Then I'll come, bring what I can." Josiah frowned. "Why help us? You don't even know us." This time she did look up. Her eyes glistened with fire. "Boy," she murmured, "you killed 5 slave catchers, 5 men who dragged our people back in chains, 5 men who beat, whipped, sold, and split families for fun and profit. You think word didn't reach us?" Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with reverence. "You two are hope. Hope is the only thing they can't kill." She straightened, moved on, and the song rose around her again. Ayana and Josiah found the root cellar exactly where she had said, half hidden behind crude slave cabins. They crawled inside and shut the door behind them. It was dark and damp and smelled of earth. Josiah sat with his back against the wall, head bowed. "Ayana, I never asked for any of this. I didn't want to be no symbol. You didn't choose to be hunted," she said softly, "but you choose how you carry it." He looked at her, eyes shining in the dim light. "Then I carry it with you." They rested in turns, listening to every sound above them, footsteps, laughter, the distant cry of a baby, then finally night. The cellar door creaked open. The gray-haired woman stood above them, silhouetted by starlight. "Come quick," she whispered. "Quiet." They followed her through shadows to a packed slave cabin. Inside, a dozen people were waiting, crowded, tired, and staring at Ayana and Josiah with something like awe. The woman, whose name was Sarah, handed them a small bundle, apples, a scrap of salt pork, a handful of corn cakes, everything she could steal without being caught. "You need to know," she said, her voice hushed but urgent. "They're raising a militia for you, real soldiers, not just slave catchers. They say they'll bring dogs from Virginia, trackers from South Carolina. They say no expense will be spared until you're caught." Josiah's breath trembled. "How long until they're ready?" A week," Sarah whispered. "Maybe 2. A young man in the corner lifted his head. "My brother escaped and made it north, way north, to a place they called the Dismal Swamp. Thousands of acres of wetland. Free people live there, black, Indian, even a few whites that don't belong nowhere else. They take in runaways." And Ayana leaned forward. "How far?" 500 miles, the young man said. "More if you take the safe paths." Ayana exhaled slowly. Josiah's hand found hers. "Then that's where we go," she said. Sarah placed her hand over theirs. "If you make it," she whispered, "you send word, you send us a sign, so we can sing knowing freedom still lives somewhere." "And if we don't make it?" Josiah asked quietly. Sarah held his gaze, her expression fierce. "Then you give them hell," she said, "every step of the way. Make them pay for every breath they try to steal." Ayana felt something burn hot and bright in her chest, not fear and not anger, something deeper, promise. When they slipped back into the forest that night following the North Star, Ayana looked once over her shoulder. In a small cabin window, Sarah stood watching, hand pressed to the glass, eyes shining. Ayana lifted her hand in silent promise. 500 miles. They might die along the way, but freedom, real freedom, swamp freedom, waited somewhere ahead. And Ayana had never been one to break a promise. The Blue Ridge Mountains rose before them like ancient guardians, tall, mist-covered, silent. Jagged silhouettes carved against the November sky, their slopes wrapped in clouds like shawls of gray and silver. Ayana and Josiah had traveled 47 days to reach them. 47 days of hunger, cold, and the constant feeling of being hunted by shadows. But the mountains offered something the flatlands never had. A place where horses struggled, where dogs lost the trail, where the land itself hid those who knew how to listen to it. Ayana touched the bark of a white oak, grounding herself in the forest. "Once we cross these ridges," she whispered, "the land changes, the swamp won't be far." Josiah nodded, though exhaustion carved deep lines into his face. His clothes hung loose, his ribs sharp beneath his skin, but his eyes, dark, fierce, unbroken, still burned with the will to survive. "We'll make it," he said, though the strain in his voice betrayed how badly he needed to believe those words. Ayana reached for his hand. "We will, together." They began their climb into the blue-shadowed heights. The forest thickened around them, branches interlocking overhead like fingers shielding secrets. Laurel thickets rose like walls, rocks jutted from the earth like old bones. They moved slowly, carefully, following paths Ayana traced by instinct, memory, and the whispered knowledge passed through generations of Cherokee who had walked these mountains long before white men claimed them. By nightfall, the wind had sharpened. It sliced through their thin clothes, stealing warmth and breath. Frost glimmered on fallen leaves. Josiah's cough returned in harsh, rattling bursts. Ayana stopped, pressed her forehead to his, and murmured a prayer over the ginger root she gave him. "Just a little farther," she whispered. "There's a hollow ahead. We can rest." They reached it. A shallow cave hidden behind thick ferns, and collapsed inside. Josiah slept almost immediately, curling close to her, his breath uneven. Ayana kept watch, staring out at the dark tree line, listening for the crack of branches, the baying of faraway dogs, the voices of men who had sworn to hunt them until the law is satisfied. None came, only the wind and only the cold, only the ache of survival. By morning, the sky was clear, streaked with the pinks and golds of dawn. They kept walking, hours passed, miles turned beneath their feet. The trail widened as they descended into a narrow valley, and that's when Ayana heard it. Music, not Cherokee flute, not the hymns of the enslaved, but lively fiddle music drifting through the trees like threads of firelit celebration. Josiah froze. "That's Cotton-Eye Joe," he whispered. "White folks dancing music." They crept closer until they saw a clearing. A small cabin. A fire burning in an iron ring. 10 or 12 mountain folk dancing in a circle, passing a jug between them. "I don't trust it," Ayana murmured. "I know," Josiah said, his eyes fixed on the fire. "But Ayana, they look warm, they look fed." She saw it then, the longing in him. The exhaustion, the dream of a single night where he wasn't hunted like game. One night where his hands could hold something other than weapons and fear. Before she could speak, one of the dancers, a young woman with red hair and a patched dress, turned her head and looked directly at them. Ayana's breath caught. The girl didn't scream, didn't call for the others. Instead, she smiled gently, pressed a finger to her lips, and motioned toward the back of the cabin. Trap, Ayana whispered. Josiah, no. But he was already moving, drawn by hope the way a freezing man reaches for fire. Ayana followed, hand on her tomahawk, ready for violence. Behind the cabin, the red-haired girl waited. Up close, she looked young, maybe 17, with eyes far too old for her age. You're the ones, she whispered, the Cherokee woman and the runaway. Ayana tensed. And if we are? The girl shrugged. My daddy don't hold with slavery, hates it more than whiskey. Lost his brother to a cotton mill down south. Says the whole system's wicked. If he knows you're here, he'll help. Josiah looked stunned. You'd risk helping us? For nothing? For something, she said quietly. For the hope that if my sister is alive somewhere, running like you are, someone will help her too. Ayana exhaled slowly. This girl wasn't lying, not with eyes like that, not with fear and faith tangled in every word. Where's your father? Josiah asked. I'll fetch him, she said. But you must hide. Some of these mountain folk, $500 changes how a man sees right and wrong. She led them to a small root cellar. They climbed down. Darkness swallowed them. Minutes later, footsteps approached. A deeper voice whispered, Let him out, Mary. The door opened. A tall, weathered man with kind eyes stood above them. I'm Thomas, he said. My daughter says you need help. And from the look of you two, she's right. He fed them stew hot enough to bring tears to Ayana's eyes. He listened as they spoke of the massacre, the river crossing, the plantation, the miles of running. When they finished, he rubbed his beard thoughtfully. The dismal swamp, you say? Ambitious, dangerous, but possible. He packed them food, blankets, a coat for Ayana, and a small tarp. At dawn, he drew a map in the dirt. Quaker Station 50 miles northeast, he said. Tell him Thomas from Poplar Cove sent you. They'll help. Ayana felt a warm ache in her chest. You risk everything helping us. Thomas shook his head. I risk my soul if I don't. They left at first light, slipping north through mountain mist, carrying hope in their packs and fear in their bones. For 3 days, the land felt almost gentle. They made good time. Their spirits lifted. Ayana even caught Josiah humming once, quietly the way a man hums when he's forgotten briefly that the world wants him dead. But on the 4th morning, they found the Quaker Station, or what was left of it. The farmhouse had been burned to a skeleton. Smoke stains clawed up the walls like the shadow of a dying scream. 2 fresh graves sat beneath a scorched oak. Josiah stopped walking, knees buckling. They found them. They killed them for helping. Ayana felt a cold fury ignite in her chest. She didn't know these people, but they had died in the same war she and Josiah were fighting. A war of bodies and shadows and whispers. Then a voice drifted from the barn. Please, don't go. A boy stepped out, skinny, dirt-streaked, eyes wild with grief, maybe 12 years old. They killed my parents, he said, voice breaking. I've been hiding, and I know about the railroad. I know the paths, the safe houses. Take me with you, please. Ayana felt Josiah's gaze, the question in it, the fear, the responsibility. She knelt before the boy. What's your name? Samuel? Ayana's voice softened. Samuel, coming with us means running, hungry nights, cold mornings, danger every hour. Can you do that? He nodded, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on his face. I can. I just can't stay here. Ayana looked at Josiah. He nodded once, solemn. Then you come, she said. You stay close, you listen, you keep quiet, and you survive. Samuel grabbed her hand. I will. I promise. They buried the boy's parents properly. Ayana whispered Cherokee prayers. Josiah whispered the names of the dead he had known. Samuel cried silently, shoulders shaking. Then the 3 fugitives turned north again. Toward the unknown, Dishu, toward the swamp, toward the possibility of freedom carved through blood and fire. And behind them the burned farmhouse stood silent, a warning, a grave, and a reminder that every mile forward would come with a cost. The morning light was thin and cold when Ayana woke. Too cold, too quiet. A silence like held breath hovered over the Virginia forest. She sat up instantly, every instinct sharpened. Josiah and Samuel were still asleep, curled beneath their thin blankets. For a moment she allowed that softness, then she heard it. Dogs, far at first, then nearer, then unmistakable. Josiah, she whispered urgently, shaking him. They found us. His eyes flew open. Samuel bolted awake at the word they. Fear already carved into his young face. They grabbed what little they had and ran. No time to hide their tracks, no time to think. Only the relentless truth pounding behind them. The militia had caught their trail. The barking grew closer, sharper, more frenzied. Horses thundered behind them. Men shouted orders. Ayana knew the sound of a coordinated hunt. She had heard it the night Josiah stumbled into her life. She had heard it again at the cabin, and now it was happening for the last time. Samuel glanced back and nearly tripped. "They're gaining. Don't look," Ayana said, pulling him forward. "Just run." But Ayana already knew something Samuel didn't. Something Josiah hadn't said aloud yet. They couldn't outrun horses, not in daylight. Not with the child. Josiah gasped. "Ayana, we need a plan." "I have one," she said, "and it would break her heart." They came upon a boulder field, a narrow valley filled with rocks and ancient stone. Samuel pointed to a steep ridge. "There are caves up there. I can hide." Ayana stopped running. "Samuel, listen to me." He turned to her, chest rising and falling fast. What is it?" "You're small. Quick, you can climb where horses can't. You hide, you survive." Josiah stared at her with dawning horror. "Ayana, no, we're not splitting up. That's how we lose each other." "It's the only way," she said. "They want us, Josiah, not him. If Samuel stays with us, he dies. If he hides, he lives." Samuel's lip trembled. "I don't want to leave you." Ayana knelt and took his face in both hands. "Family doesn't always walk the same road, but we protect each other, and this is how you protect us." The dogs were close now. Close enough she could hear individual snarls. "Go," she said. "Now." Samuel climbed, fast as a squirrel. Within seconds he was swallowed by stone and shadow. Ayana and Josiah turned north, running loudly on purpose, breaking twigs, disturbing leaves, creating a trail too obvious for any hunter to ignore. They ran until the land betrayed them. A clearing, surrounded on three sides by thorn and bramble too thick to cut through. A natural trap. Josiah slowed. "Ayana, I know." Dogs burst into the clearing, a wave of teeth and fury. Ayana swung the tomahawk. One dog fell instantly. Josiah crushed another with his hammer, but more came. Then the men arrived, more than 20, armed, confident, hungry for blood. The militia formed a semicircle, guns raised. Their leader, a heavy man with mutton-chop sideburns, rode forward. "Well," he sneered, "look what we caught, the Cherokee savage and her pet buck." Ayana lifted her chin. "My name is Ayana, and this man is Josiah. We are not property." The leader laughed. "You killed 5 good white men. You think you'll see daylight again?" Josiah stepped forward despite the guns pointed at him. "Your good men hunted human beings like animals, and I'd kill 500 more if it kept my wife safe." Murmurs rippled through the line. The leader's face twisted. "Hang them," he ordered. "Now." Ropes were thrown over branches. Hands grabbed Ayana and Josiah, dragging them forward. A noose tightened against Ayana's throat, rough hemp digging into her skin. Josiah met her eyes. No fear. Only love. "Worth it," she whispered. "Worth it," he echoed. The lieutenant raised his hand, preparing to signal the execution. A gunshot cracked from the ridge. "Samuel." The shot missed, but it sent panic through the militia. Horses bucked, men cursed, the line broke. Ayana moved first. She threw her tomahawk with perfect precision. It spun through the air, glinting in the sun, and buried itself in the colonel's chest. He toppled backward off his horse, choking on his own surprise. Josiah slammed into the men beside him, swinging his hammer. Bones shattered, screams erupted, but there were too many guns, too many hands. Ayana was tackled from behind, pinned. Josiah was clubbed across the shoulder, forced to his knees. They were losing, oh no, they were dying. "Stop," someone shouted from the forest. Dozens of voices rose in a single thundering cry. Then gunfire. Real gunfire, organized, trained, furious. Figures poured from the trees, black men and women, Creek men, runaways, outlaws, people with scars and rifles and eyes that had forgotten fear. The Maroons of the dismal swamp. The militia broke instantly, not out of discipline but terror. The Maroons struck like a storm. Shots dropped horsemen. Knives flashed. Slings cracked. War cries echoed through the clearing. In minutes the militia scattered the brave ones dead. The cowards fleeing, their dogs howling as they ran. A tall, scarred woman approached Ayana and cut the rope from her wrists. "We got word from a boy," she said. "Said 2 fighters were coming, fighters who killed slave catchers and didn't bow to any master." Samuel ran toward them from the rocks, tears streaming. "Ayana," he sobbed. "Josiah." Ayana pulled him into her arms. "We're here, we're alive." Josiah knelt and wrapped an arm around them both. For the first time in weeks he laughed, a raw, broken sound filled with relief. The scarred woman nodded toward the north. "At the swamp's a day's walk," she said. "You're safe now." Ayana took Josiah's hand. Josiah took Samuel's. And together the 3 of them walked toward the untouched wilderness where no slave catcher dared step. toward the swamp where freedom grew like roots in black water, toward the place where hunted people became legends. Ayana looked back only once, at the clearing where death had almost claimed them, at the bodies of men who believed love was a crime, at the noose that still hung from a branch swaying in the wind. Never again, she whispered, and she followed the maroons into the trees. The dawn light barely touched the world when Ayana, Josiah, and Samuel stepped into the edge of the dismal swamp. Mist curled around their ankles like living breath, rising from the black water in slow, ghostly tendrils. The air smelled of moss and wet earth, of old secrets and older freedom. Samuel clung to Ayana's hand. Josiah carried their pack across his tired shoulders, every muscle aching, every step heavy, but his eyes bright with something he had not felt in years. Hope. Dinah, the scarred woman who had led the rescue, turned back to them. "Welcome," she said softly. "It doesn't look like much, but this swamp has saved more souls than any preacher in the South." Ayana looked around. Towering bald cypress trees rose from the murky water, their roots forming arches like cathedrals built from mud and memory. Vines hung low, frogs croaked in the distance, the ground shifted beneath her feet, alive, unstable, unpredictable. "This place protects you?" Josiah asked. Dinah smiled. "No, we protect each other. The swamp just hides us from the eyes of men." They walked deeper. The path was a narrow boardwalk of logs tied together with vines, zigzagging across pools of still water that reflected the sky like broken mirrors. Every sound, every splash, every bird call felt magnified, echoing through the thick air. "How do you live here?" Samuel whispered. "With patience," Dinah said, "with skill, and with the knowledge that freedom ain't supposed to be comfortable, it's just supposed to be ours." As they moved, the mist parted to reveal wooden platforms rising from the water, small cabins built on stilts, gardens growing in floating beds of peat and soil, children running barefoot across narrow planks. A whole hidden world, a world carved out by people the South had tried to erase. Ayana stopped walking. A lump rose in her throat. "Josiah, look. Families, laughter, safety, life." Josiah blinked hard, his chest rising and falling unevenly. "I never thought," he swallowed, "I never thought someplace like this could be real." Dinah touched the hilt of her knife, a gesture of pride. "We built it, brick by brick, back by back, blood by blood." Ayana knew exactly what that meant. Freedom always required a cost. She carried that cost on her hands, on her heart, in the 5 marks carved into her memory. They reached a wide platform. They could hear hammering, smell stew cooking, feel warmth radiating from fires set in raised clay pits. People looked up as they approached, curious, cautious, then slowly smiling. Dinah raised her voice. "These are the ones the South wants dead. Cherokee woman Ayana, blacksmith Josiah, and the boy who survived the burning, Samuel Price." A murmur spread through the crowd, not fear, admiration, but recognition. "Respect." An older man stepped forward, skin weathered, beard white, eyes sharp. "You two are the storm that's been making Georgia tremble." Ayana stiffened. "We didn't ask to be legends." He chuckled. "Nobody does. Legends are made when ordinary folk refuse to die the way the world expects." Josiah lowered his gaze, struggling. "We only did what we had to survive." "And that," the old man said, "is why you're welcome here." He offered his hand, first to Josiah, then to Ayana. A gesture of equal respect, rare in any world, rarer still in the South. "Stay," he said. "Build something new, heal, work, live." Josiah exhaled shakily, a sound halfway between relief and disbelief. We'd be honored." Ayana squeezed his hand. She felt something inside her loosen, something knotted for years, finally releasing. Samuel looked up at both of them, hope shining in his young eyes. "This means we're safe now, right?" Ayana knelt beside him, brushing hair from his face. "It means we begin again." That night the swamp glowed with firelight. Drums echoed over the water. Voices rose in songs older than America. Ayana and Josiah stood side by side, watching children chase fireflies, watching elders stir pots of stew, watching people finally live without fear. Josiah slipped his hand into hers. "Ayana, we made it. Not by chance," she said, "by choice, by fight, by blood." "And now?" "Now," she said quietly, "we plant roots." He leaned his forehead to hers. Together. The swamp wind rustled through the cypress branches, a deep murmur like the land itself was speaking. For the first time since she was 14, Ayana felt stillness. No running, no hiding, no killing. Just breath, just life, just love, unbound by law, untouched by hatred, unbroken by the world that wanted them dead. The swamp accepted them that night, took them in, held them close, and Ayana, standing beneath the sky reflected in black water, knew one truth more powerful than any law written by men. Freedom wasn't a destination. Freedom was a choice they had made and would keep making every day for the rest of their lives.